Welcome to the main event. Let's get ready to rumble!
Hello, everybody. Yes, sir, it's finally here.
That day has arrived again. All you need to say.
All right, welcome on in, everybody, to another edition of Sayf at the Plate Sports Talk. I'm your host, Clayton Sayfie, here on 89.9 WTHS Holland, the commercial-free voice of Hope College. Great to have you here with us. Monday, March 25th. March is almost over, but March is just getting started in the college basketball world. And, of course, March Madness, NCAA tournament, taking over the sports world, taking over America at this point in the year, each and every year, especially this year. A lot of storylines going on in the NCAA tournament. We survived the first weekend of the tournament. Both Michigan and Michigan State still alive. Michigan State advancing to their first Sweet 16 since 2015. Michigan making their third straight Sweet 16 trip under John Beilein. 5 Sweet 16s the last 7 years for the Wolverines. We will dive into Michigan and Michigan State in both of their matchups as they go forward here in the regionals. Michigan State in the East region, Michigan in the West region, and a possible Final Four matchup between the two ball clubs. We will talk about all that coming up. We'll go through my bracket. I had, of course, a couple brackets, but a main bracket that's still alive here. 14 out of the 16 in the Sweet 16 correct. Now, it wasn't the hardest Sweet 16, in my opinion, to predict this year, just because of, I think, it's kind of a top-heavy bracket and top-heavy group of teams. And a lot of people are talking about it in the college basketball world all season long, is there's really 8, 6 to 8, maybe you'd throw a couple other in there and make it 10 teams that can really win the national championship, which I think is a good amount of teams, but I think those same amount of teams are really the teams that are competing for the Final Four. Now we're down to 16, of course, as we head into the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. But Michigan State, still both there. You got a lot of blue blood programs still in the mix. So I'll go through my bracket, and we'll talk about some of the notable games from this weekend, starting last Thursday all the way until last night. Some good games. You do end up with all the 1 seeds still alive, all the 2 seeds still alive, all the 3 seeds still alive, 2 of the 4 seeds, a 1 5 seed, and 1 12 seed. So, pretty much the favorites advancing to the second weekend, other than the 5 and the 12 seed that advance. And Oregon Ducks, the one team, double-digit team in the Sweet 16 this year. So not as many upsets, not the crazy upsets that you've seen, but still a lot of storylines that have gone on. And we have not been on air either since the Big Ten tournament, where Michigan and Michigan State played for the Big Ten tournament championship on Sunday afternoon just 8 days ago, and feels like a really long time ago considering what has happened in the college basketball world since then, including the first weekend of the NCAA tournament already under our belts, heading into Sweet 16 Elite 8 this weekend, another week, and then the Final Four and national championship game on that final Monday night. We will see who will be there. Won't be Michigan and Michigan State in the national championship game, but a possible matchup in the Final Four. We'll talk about that later on in the show as well. So we'll go through the games from over the weekend when we come back here on 89.9 WTHS Holland. This is Sayf at the Plate Sports Talk. All right, welcome back to Safe at the Plate Sports Talk here on 89.9 WTHS Holland. We're going through the bracket now in the NCAA tournament as we first weekend's over. And today is just maybe one of the more depressing days of the calendar year if you're a sports fan. You had 4 straight days of basketball. You really had 6 straight days of basketball. If you count the games in Dayton, the play-in games. And really before that, you had conference tournaments. The weekend before, you had Michigan and Michigan State in the Big Ten Tournament Championship last Sunday. You had the small schools with their conference tournaments all week before that, the weekend before that. And here we are on Monday. I mean, we do have some women's NCAA tournament games tonight, but there is just not much on the men's side. I'm sure I'll pop on the occasional NIT game as we move forward throughout the week. But everyone kind of wait until Thursday where you got some good matchups. Michigan will play Thursday night in the Sweet 16 against Texas Tech. Michigan State slated for Friday night. But let's go through the bracket here. Round of 64 in the East region. Starting off with Duke. They beat North Dakota State, the 1 versus 16 there, 85-62. VCU, UCF. UCF would go on to win that game 73-58 very decidedly. And you got Taco Fall, 7'6" for UCF. You have Aubrey Dawkins, former Michigan player and son of the coach, Johnny Dawkins, who was former Duke player and Duke assistant. And Coach K said, Johnny Dawkins is his first a really star player at Duke that really started of the run that Coach K has had there as the head coach of Duke. Liberty, the 12 seed gets an upset over the 5 seed Mississippi State, 80-76, a really good game. I did not pick that. I picked Mississippi State. I thought, everyone was picking Liberty in an upset game, and I guess there was a reason why they move on to the round of 32. Virginia Tech beat St. Louis 66-52. Maryland in a really, really close game at the end, taking care of business, though, against Belmont 79-77. I picked Yale over LSU in the first round, the 3 seed. LSU Tigers did win, though, by 5 points, 79-74. I had Louisville over Minnesota, but Minnesota really got hot from 3-point range, and they win 86-76. Kind of a revenge game there for the Pitino family. Son of Rick Pitino, Richard Pitino, is the head coach of Minnesota. Of course, Rick Pitino, the recently fired at Louisville. And Michigan State, the 2 seed, in a dogfight against Bradley, they get the win 76-65, but that game was really a heck of a lot closer than that throughout the game. And a lot of these games were as well. Even Duke in their first-round game was down in the first half there, had a little bit of a scare, but then was able to get the job done in advance to the round of 32. Let's go to the West region now. Gonzaga, they beat Farley Dickinson. Syracuse lost to Baylor 78-69. I had Syracuse in that game. Marquette and Murray State, a really intriguing matchup. You got Marcus Howard for Marquette. You have John Morant for Murray State. I picked Marquette. I thought they're a more complete team, even though I've kind of had question marks about them all season long. But I didn't know if John Morant could take over the game and beat them single-handedly. Well, he did. He had a triple-double in that game, and he dominated 83-64 Murray State with the win over Marquette. Florida State, they won 76-69 over Vermont. A lot of people had Vermont in that game as an upset pick, but the 4 seed Florida State Seminoles will move on. Buffalo and Arizona State, Bobby Hurley, now the coach of Arizona State, coaching against his old team at Buffalo. Buffalo, the 6 seed, moves on in blowout fashion, 91-74. Texas Tech, the 3 seed, over Northern Kentucky, 72-57. Texas Tech really looking good coming out of the first weekend. Florida and Nevada, really good game out in Des Moines. I was at that game ahead of the Michigan-Montana game, and Florida 70-61. They had a big lead, though. For most of that game, Nevada really started pressing and forced some turnovers, got Florida really uncomfortable, came back and made that quite a game at the end of it, but Florida was able to pull it out with a couple of clutch buckets late, 70-61, like I said, the final there. Michigan and Montana, the Wolverines 74, Montana Grizzlies 55 is the final. Michigan with a 19-point win, looked really good on late Thursday night in Des Moines. I was at that game as well as Michigan and Michigan State's games on Saturday. We'll talk about those in a little bit. Let's move to the South region now. Virginia against Gardner-Webb, and Gardner-Webb had, a 12-point, 14-point lead in the first half, and it was quite the buzz during that game in the first half because of what happened last year with Virginia, the 1 seed, going down. For the first time, a 1 seed lost to UMBC, the 16 seed last year. Gardner-Webb started out red hot, and Virginia really didn't have an answer. They did control that game. Virginia wins 71-56. Ole Miss and Oklahoma. I had Ole Miss in this game, but Oklahoma, and you feel like whoever you have in the 8-9 games or 7-10 games, it's going to be the opposite that happens. They're pretty much a coin flip, just because how close all these teams are, grouped up, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the seedings. Wisconsin and Oregon, 5 seed Wisconsin loses to the Oregon Ducks, 72-54. Here's the upset that I picked right. Kansas State and UC Irvine. The 4 seed Kansas State lost to UC Irvine. UC Irvine wins 70-64. So I picked that right. I'll give myself credit for that. I'll brag about that one a little bit. It's easy to pick upsets. It's hard to pick the right ones, and got fortunate on that one. Really hadn't seen them all year, but I'll take it on my bracket there. Villanova and St. Mary's, close game. Villanova, though, moves on 61-57 for Villanova. Purdue, the 3 seed against the 14 seed Old Dominion. Purdue has really looked good in this first weekend as well. They will move on 61-48 victory there. And then in the 7-10 game, Cincinnati, the 7 seed, goes down to Iowa, the 10 seed, 79-72. And Tennessee and Colgate was a lot closer than a lot of people imagined. But the Tennessee Volunteers move on with a 77-70 win over Colgate. Let's move now to the Midwest region. North Carolina and Iona, 88-73. North Carolina wins there, the 1 versus 16 seed. In the 8-9 game, Utah State loses to Washington. Of course, I had Utah State in that game, so obviously Washington won 78-61. Auburn and New Mexico State, a crazy game. At the end, New Mexico State had some opportunities to win that game. They had an open layup, kicked it out for a 3. Their guy gets fouled shooting 3, and he misses 2 out of 3. The free throws, wasn't able to take the lead, wasn't even able to tie it up, so they lose 78-77. They actually had a 3 at the buzzer, too, to win it, and airballed it. Kansas and Northeastern. Kansas slaughtered Northeastern 87-53. So Kansas looked good coming out of the round of 64. Iowa State and Ohio State, kind of a rematch from, I believe it was 2013 in the regional game where Ohio State, I think Aaron Kraft hit a buzzer beater, but Iowa State loses a close one to Ohio State, 62-59. Houston and Georgia State, another kind of an upset pick. You saw Georgia State upset a team a couple of years ago. Houston, though, wins big, 84-55. Wofford and Seton Hall. Wofford's got Fletcher McGee, best three-point shooter in the country, so a lot of people were excited to watch him. I had Seton Hall moving on. I thought it was another one of those cases where they're the more complete team, just like Marquette. But the Big East has failed me this weekend. Wofford moves on with the 84-68 win. And finishing out the last game on the bracket from the round of 64, Kentucky and Abilene Christian. Kentucky in dominating fashion, 79-44 over Abilene Christian. Let's move now to the round of 32, where things get a lot more interesting. And let's start at the top of the bracket in the East region, where you think, most people have Duke winning it all, right? They're probably the most common pick to win it all out of all the brackets out there. Duke and UCF, Taco Fall, 7'6", like I mentioned. Zion Williamson, R.J. Barrett, Cam Reddish, Trey Jones, all the talent that Duke has. It was a heck of a game. Johnny Dawkins, Aubrey Dawkins, the father-son duo had Duke on the ropes. Aubrey Dawkins with a tap-in almost, right before time expired, just did not go in. They had other opportunities in the game, and UCF really looked like they had Duke there before a couple big plays. Zion Williamson and one missed a free throw. R.J. Barrett got the rebound and put it in. So a 4-point possession that put Duke on top, and they were able to hang on there, as I said, with the missed tap-in by Aubrey Dawkins. 77-76, Duke knocking off UCF, and probably one of the better basketball games I've seen, probably the best basketball game overall of the weekend. There's been a couple that really rival it, and we'll talk about those as well. So Duke marching on to the Sweet 16. Let's move down now to Virginia Tech and Liberty. The 4-seed Virginia Tech, they will win 67-58. They will take on Duke in the Sweet 16, an ACC matchup there. And they have Justin Robinson back. Duke has Zion Williamson back, but Virginia Tech did beat the Zion Williamson-less Duke Blue Devils late in the ACC season, so that'll be an interesting matchup between two conference foes. LSU and Maryland was another one of those games that really came down to the wire. It looked like Maryland had it there, taking a lead with a Jalen Smith 3 from the corner, but LSU comes down. Tremont Waters with a beautiful scoop-in layup to win the game 69-67. I had Yale instead of LSU there. I had Maryland beating LSU, but nonetheless, the LSU Tigers out of the SEC advance to the Sweet 16. And then a Big Ten matchup, the 2-seed Michigan State Spartans taking on the 10-seed Minnesota Golden Gophers, and absolute domination from Michigan State, 70-50 in that game. And really, common opponents, Minnesota really played their hearts out in beating Louisville and really gave everything they had. They were hot from 3 in that game on Thursday, and Michigan State just kind of took it to them. It was really never a game. They cut it within 9 at one point, but it really was never a game in Des Moines there. So Michigan State advancing to take on LSU in the Sweet 16. LSU without their head coach, Will Wade, with the cheating FBI investigation where he is suspended indefinitely. The West region now, Gonzaga and Baylor. Wasn't really much of a game. It was about a 10-point game the whole game, and Gonzaga wins 83-71. Florida State, man, they really showed a lot this weekend. They're playing really good basketball right now. They played Murray State, the 12-seed Florida State, after early in the game looked like it was going to be quite a game. John Morant hit 4 threes, I think, within the first 5 minutes of that game, and looked like he was going to go off again and lead his team to victory, or at least be a very close game. But Florida State took control of the game, and they win 90-62. Texas Tech and Buffalo, 3-seed Texas Tech moves on with a 78-58 win, and they look really good coming out of the first weekend. One of the better teams all season long, won the Big 12 this year, and are really going to be a tough opponent in the Sweet 16 for Michigan, who wins. The 2-seed Wolverines beat the 10-seed Florida 64-49, and the Wolverines will take on the Texas Tech Red Raiders in Anaheim in the Sweet 16. The winner of that game will face the winner of Gonzaga and Florida State. So really similar bracket from last year in L.A. at the Staples Center. It was Gonzaga against Florida State, Michigan against Texas A&M this year against Texas Tech. But you still have that Gonzaga-Florida State matchup. Florida State won that game. The Michigan ended up winning in the Elite Eight game, sending them to the Final Four and eventually the national championship game last year. But really similar region, especially with Michigan even playing Montana in the first game as they did a year ago. So kind of interesting how, it's kind of the deja vu bracket, like a lot of people are talking about how similar it is to a year ago. So that'll be Gonzaga, Florida State, Michigan, and Texas Tech in the regional semifinal Thursday, and then the final will be Saturday. In the South region, Virginia beat Oklahoma 63-51, really got themselves into another gear after that scare early in the game against Gardner-Webb in the round of 64. Oregon and UC Irvine, so we knew a high seed was going to be in the Sweet 16. The 12 seed Oregon Ducks are the lowest seed in the Sweet 16, highest number seed at the 12 seed, but they will advance and play Virginia in the South Regional. Purdue and Villanova, I thought this was going to be a really good game. It wasn't. Purdue looks really good coming out of the first weekend. They're one of those teams that impressed people. I think that played better than maybe they were expected. I think a lot of people picking Villanova in this game just because of the track record of Villanova as of late, especially under Jay Wright in tournaments. He's been dynamite in tournaments as of late. I did have Purdue in this game advancing to the Sweet 16. Villanova just hasn't shown me enough all season long. But again, I thought it was going to be a really close game, and Purdue wins 87-61. They will advance to the Sweet 16. Tennessee and Iowa, another one of those crazy games over the weekend. Yesterday afternoon, first game of the day, Tennessee comes out running and gunning, gets up a lot. They're up, 20-some at halftime, and, you think that game's over. Not a chance. Iowa came all the way back, had it within one, tied it up. They went to overtime. Tennessee pulled away a little bit in overtime. They win 83-77. I do have Tennessee in my Final Four. But I think that worried a lot of people late in the game, and a lot of the body language they showed late in the game yesterday against Iowa was kind of worrisome for a lot of people, especially Tennessee fans and people that have them going far. So, as we look at the South, it will be Virginia against Oregon and Purdue against Tennessee left in that region. Now to the Midwest region, North Carolina winning by a lot, 81-59 over Washington. Auburn, who, remember, scraped by in that first round, but that's all they needed to now get themselves to the Sweet 16. They win 89-75 over Kansas. This Auburn team can be very dangerous the way they shoot the three and the pace that they play at. So they will play North Carolina in the Sweet 16. Houston, 74-59 over Ohio State. Pulled away at the end, but really was a semi-close game all game long. Kentucky and Wofford, very close game. Kentucky, though, ends up pulling it out 62-56. Fletcher McGee, mentioned him earlier, best three-point shooter in college basketball percentage-wise this year, 0 for 12 from three, and that was the difference, in my opinion, in that game. So let's look at all the matchups one more time. We go through Sweet 16 matchups in the East. Duke against Virginia Tech, LSU against Michigan State, Gonzaga against Florida State in the West, along with Texas Tech and Michigan. In the South, Virginia against Oregon, and Purdue against Tennessee. And in the Midwest, North Carolina against Auburn and Houston against Kentucky. Lot of favorites advancing to the second weekend. All the 1 seeds, all the 2 seeds, all the 3 seeds, 2 of the 4 seeds. And then you have Auburn, the 5 seed, and Oregon, the 12 seed. But again, these are the teams that are legitimate contenders outside of a couple of these for the national championship. I think any of these teams can get to the Final Four. I think there's, Oregon, the way they play and the great defense they play matches up, kind of a mirror image of Virginia in terms of style of play. They could get past them. I think Tennessee's vulnerable, and they showed that late in that Iowa game. I think Purdue is playing great basketball right now. I mean, there's teams that you didn't really expect. You expected them maybe to get to this point, but you didn't expect them to look as good as they do, like the Texas Techs, which I think is going to be a really tough game for Michigan, like the Auburns, who's really dangerous when they're hitting their threes. Florida State looked really good. Duke looked vulnerable, but at the same time, people are talking about that. Oh, Duke, number 1 overall seed, struggle with the 9 seed. Hey, man, they advanced. That's all you need to do. Remember Michigan last year against Houston? Jordan Poole hitting the buzzer beater 3. That's all you need to do sometimes is get out of that round. Get out of the dogfight you're in. Maybe it's a bad matchup for you. No team's unbeatable, but if you just win that game and pull it out some way, doesn't matter how you win, then that might spark the rest of your run all the way to the national championship game, all the way to possibly the national championship. If you win that game to the Final Four, it might show that there's some underlying issues with Duke and they don't match up that well with everyone. But it might not. It might just show that was a tough matchup for them. They're moving on. They might take care of business in the regional. They might beat Virginia Tech and then LSU or Michigan State, the winner there. So I think be careful when you write Duke off. And I don't think many people are doing that, but I think a lot of people are doubting Duke right now. I think they're still a very good team. I do think they have been overrated all season long. And, sure, they're possibly the favorite. They have the number 1 draft pick, whatever. They're not unbeatable, as we saw yesterday where they almost got beat. But again, they might win it all. Something like that, the UCF game might spark the rest of the run that Duke needs. So we'll, obviously see how they come out against Virginia Tech on Friday night. But intrigued with a lot of these matchups. I think all college basketball season, you haven't seen matchups like these. Everyone's been in their conference. I think it's refreshing for a team like Purdue to get out of their conference. They're like, hey, we got a guy that's over 7 foot in Harns that's really tough to guard. They have Carson Edwards where it's, if you're not having, a week to prepare for Carson Edwards, he's tough to stop. Ryan Klein is a great shooter. Really impressed with what Purdue's doing. I think they're a team that really needed to get out of the Big Ten, even though, hey, they had a heck of a lot of success in the Big Ten, winning the Big Ten regular season, a share of the conference title. But I still think they had another gear that they showed this weekend in a blowout win over Villanova. But I think pretty much every team left has a chance to win it all, and every team left has a chance to get to the Final Four. I think Oregon is the team I would not peg as a team that could win it all. But hey, they're still dancing. I think they can get to the Final Four, especially, they're not the worst matchup for Virginia. They play just like Virginia. So I think it's going to be an interesting matchup. A lot of good matchups this weekend. It's tough that we got to wait a few days here until more NCAA tournament action. But when we come back, we are going to talk about Michigan and Michigan State, both in the Sweet 16. Michigan State returning to the Sweet 16 for the first time since 2015. Michigan returning to its 3rd straight berth to the Sweet 16. And both will have some tough matchups if they want to get to that Final Four in Minneapolis, if they want to win the national championship and cut down those nets in early April. But we'll talk about their matchups. We'll talk about and go a little bit deeper into the 2 games that both teams played over the weekend in Des Moines. So we'll talk about that when we come back here on 89.9 WTHS Holland. This is Sayf at the Plate Sports Talk.
I can't get these memories out of my mind, and some kind of madness.
Welcome back to Sayf at the Plate Sports Talk here on 89.9 WTHS Holland. I'm your host, Clayton Sayfie. Let's talk about Michigan now and look back at the weekend it was for them in the NCAA tournament. 2-seeded Wolverines on Thursday night opened up the tournament against the 15-seed Montana Grizzlies. And, I think a lot of people expected this to be, a big win for Michigan. You did see Michigan State struggle earlier in the day, and we'll talk about that. Some of the lower seeds were really putting up some fights against the higher seeds on Thursday and Friday. Michigan really came out and played well. I think some good signs for Michigan moving forward is Charles Matthews, Tournament Charles. He's back. Okay, he was the most valuable player of the West region last year, with Michigan moving on to the Final Four. And he looked like that same player. Coming off the injury, he had been back for a few games in the Big Ten tournament. Didn't really look like himself. He's playing more minutes now. He played 35 minutes on Thursday night, had 22 points, 10 rebounds, 8 for 12 from the floor, 1 for 3 from 3-point range, 5 of 6 from the free throw line. That's old Charles Matthews right there. Before the injury, he had a couple, he's had some offensive struggles this year, even before the injury. But that's what you saw and the whole country saw on display last year when Charles Matthews led the Wolverines to the national championship game, along with Mo Wagner and others. Iggy Brazdeikis with a big game. He had 14 points, 7 rebounds, 4 for 10 from the floor. John Teskey was really solid. Montana's a small team. The guy that John Teskey was guarding was about 6'5". John Teskey 7'1". But he really held his own, was able to move his feet really well, which I think bodes well for Michigan moving forward if they're going to have to play some teams that are quicker and smaller, kind of like Montana. Nobody's as small as Montana that's left in the field. But John Teskey had 11 points, 9 rebounds. Jordan Poole had 10 points. Didn't really have a great shooting performance. 5 of those were from the free throw line. Xavier Simpson really moving the ball, really rebounding. Has made more of an effort of rebounding as of late. He had 4 points against Montana, 7 rebounds, 10 assists. Has been really efficient. Did have a couple turnovers earlier in that game just due to, and it was uncharacteristic, but just due to the way the Montana plays some of those ball screens. But Michigan moves on. They win 74-55. And then Saturday took on the Florida Gators, who's a team that plays really good defense coming out of the SEC. They like to slow the ball down, similar to Michigan in a couple of ways. And, Michigan was really going to have to play well to win this game, especially, any game in the NCAA tournament. You're not moving on if you don't play well. Florida came out very hot, shooting 50% from 3 at the halftime break, but they were hitting shots. They banked one in that were huge shots. Michigan led at the break 32-28, and the defense really settled in. They were using the term after the game is at halftime, we really wanted to shut their water off from 3. A couple of them mentioned that, hey, we wanted to shut their water off. Whatever that means, I assume, it's just shutting them down and, stopping the bleeding. They did it. Whatever they're talking about worked. Florida only scored 21 points in the second half. Michigan rolls to victory 64-49. Charles Matthews looked pretty good. Didn't have quite the offensive performance that he had Thursday night. He had 9 points, 7 rebounds. John Teskey was solid despite a couple missed shots around the rim. He had 8 points and 10 rebounds. Jordan Poole caught fire, which I think is huge for Michigan coming into the Sweet 16. He had 19 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist, 4 for 9 from 3-point range. Xavier Simpson, how about this? 9-9-9. 9 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists. One of the better point guards in the country, and he's shown it throughout the season, but he showed it again in the round of 32 against Florida. Iggy Brazdeikis, was matched up with a tough defender from Florida. Didn't have much offense. He had 5 points and 3 rebounds. But this is a Michigan team that is one of those teams that's looking good coming out of the first weekend. Really took care of the business that they had in front of them. They had Montana. You have the winner of Nevada and Florida. I thought Nevada was a worse matchup for Michigan than Florida. Still thought they would get through that game. But it ended up being Florida. And, there was a lot of talk about how Florida plays a similar style and could beat Michigan. They kept it close early, I think, just because they were on fire shooting from 3-point range. But that second half, Michigan defense put the clamps down and really showed that this is an elite defensive team. They take over now the number 1 spot in defensive efficiency in the country. And who's number 2? The team that they're going to play on Thursday night at the Honda Center in Anaheim, Texas Tech. So that will be a huge matchup of defense on Thursday night in the regional semifinal in the West region. Of course, we'll preview that matchup here. But, I think going forward, Michigan's playing well. They're hitting some of their shots. I think they still need some guys to heat up, like Isaiah Livers, who had a tough start to the Florida game, but really started attacking at the rim and had some huge dunks late. The highlights I've been seeing all over social media. I think Isaiah Livers, Charles Matthews playing the way he did on Thursday and Saturday. Jordan Poole heating up the way he did on Saturday. There's a lot of good signs coming out of this first weekend of the tournament for Michigan. You have Xavier Simpson, tremendous defender, incredible passer, and is really playing well on both ends of the floor. Jordan Poole heated up. Charles Matthews is back to tournament Charles. Iggy Brazdeikis had a big game Thursday night, had a tough matchup Saturday, but I think he is going to have, some big games coming up here if he has the opportunity. John Teskey played very solid, and he's a tough matchup for teams standing at 7'1". Off the bench, Isaiah Livers came on late in the Florida game. You'd like to see him hit a couple more threes. But, man, this Michigan team, and I will mention Eli Brooks, really has struggled this year shooting the ball and with his confidence going towards the rim at the backup point guard / 2-guard spot. Really came in and has played well. I had 4 big points against Florida, and he's a really good defender as well. So 1 through 7 right now, Michigan is looking very good. Colin Castleton would be that 8th guy off the bench if Michigan decides not to go small when John Teskey's off the floor with Isaiah Livers at the 5, if they decide to go with another 7-footer, Colin Castleton, the freshman. I think right now Michigan is very dangerous. They look good coming out of the first weekend. They have a tough matchup on Thursday. Then you would, if you move on, you would play the winner of Gonzaga and Florida State. Another tough game. This weekend's kind of the coin flip round, in my opinion. I think you give certain teams an edge in a game, but it comes down to a coin flip, and maybe you give one, a team a percentage or 2 advantage. I think Michigan would have the edge in this game on Thursday. I do have Michigan as my national champion in my bracket. I think they're going to have the edge against Texas Tech. They're a better offensive team than Texas Tech. Texas Tech slightly better or slightly worse defensive team. Number 1, number 2 in defensive efficiency in the country. So I think it's going to be a heck of a matchup in Anaheim on Thursday night, and may the better team win. But I think Michigan's going to have a slight edge in this game. They're favored by 2 right now, according to Vegas, and I think that's just about right. I'll take Michigan by 5 in this game, but I think 2 points is just about right in terms of a point spread for this game because of how similar these teams are, because of how good they both are. And Texas Tech, I talked about it when we were going through the round at 64-32. This is a team that looks red hot coming out of the first weekend. So it's not necessarily the team you want to play. Nonetheless, you play who's in front of you in the NCAA tournament, and then you don't apologize for it. You don't make excuses. And this is who Michigan has. A tough matchup, but I think one that they can win. I'll take the Wolverines by 5. Now, let's talk about Michigan State and the weekend that they had in Des Moines as well. Michigan State, Bradley, 2 versus 15 on Thursday afternoon. And Michigan State struggled for the majority of this game. They were down at halftime 35-34. Bradley just kind of went cold at the end of the game, and credit Michigan State's defense for that. I think this is a really dangerous Michigan State team to guard. Cassius Winston had 26 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists. Matt McQuaid in double figures with 10 points. Xavier Tillman with a big game, a double-double from him, 16 points and 11 rebounds. Nick Ward off the bench with 8 and 5. I think Michigan State did what they had to do in this game. It was a tough game. And might have been in the back of their head a few years ago. They lost to a 15 seed in Middle Tennessee State. They haven't gotten out of the first weekend in quite some time. But they got through that first game. And I just talked about it, and this is on a different scale than Duke UCF. But all you need to do is survive and advance, and you're on to the next round. And you may have a better matchup waiting for you, even though the seed might be higher. So Michigan State survives in advance, was close for quite some time. Michigan State pulled away at the end, gets an 11-point victory. Now Saturday, Michigan State in a Big Ten matchup with Minnesota. Jordan Murphy played 4 minutes, was not able to give it a go after hurting his back on Thursday against Louisville. And I think that was big for Minnesota. They got nothing easy. Again, credit Michigan State's defense, which has been superb all season long. But Minnesota had nothing easy. Coffee had a tough go at it early, and it looked like are they going to score? They were stuck on 11 points for so long. It's like, are they going to score another point in this game? They only had 19 points at halftime. Michigan State defense playing really well. Coffee ended up with 27 points. That's about it for Minnesota. But early on, that's on 8 of 24 shooting, 1 of 7 from 3, and 10 of those are free throws. He's the only guy that was able to do anything, and even early in that game, he had a tough go at it. Michigan State, though, balanced scoring attack, a lot more balanced than their first-round win over Bradley in this game. Cassius Winston had 13 points, 9 assists, 4 rebounds. Matt McQuaid had 9 points and 4 rebounds. Xavier Tillman, another big game from him. He had 14 points and 6 rebounds. Aaron Henry, 9 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists. Kenny Goins, 9 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists. Nick Ward off the bench with 9 points and 7 rebounds. That's a balanced attack, folks, from Michigan State. They looked really good against Minnesota. I know it's Minnesota. They're not a great team. I know they're a familiar foe that Michigan State was able to just kind of take advantage of. But Michigan State looked good. I don't care who you're playing. They looked really good on Saturday. Cassius Winston is going to be tough to stop. The shooters that Michigan State has around him, the talent on this Michigan State team is ridiculous in terms of knowing your role and doing it, pretty much to a very excellent level. Cassius Winston, primary ball handler, spreads the ball around, great shooter, great passer, can get in the lane, has a great floater. Kenny Goins, maybe the best shooting 4-man in the country just from that one spot that he stands, between the wing and the top of the key. And he just has one job. It's just pick and pop, get rebounds, and hit that 3 when you're open. You don't have to shoot if you're not open. If you're Kenny Goins. Xavier Tillman, pick and roll game, get the post feed, catch the ball, finish at the rim. Nick Ward, post up over your right shoulder. Everyone's got such a defined role in this Michigan State team. They've carved out these roles for themselves. And I think that's what makes them such a successful team is just they got a bunch of guys that know exactly what they're doing. They're not trying to do too much. Tom Izzo's going to let you know if you're not doing enough. And they just play. And I think that's what made Michigan State so good all regular season long. And they've been good in years past, but I think this team really has that extra gear to them, which I think is surprising to some because of the NBA talent that they had last year with Jaren Jackson, Miles Bridges, and the team that didn't get out of the first weekend. They haven't got out of the first weekend since 2015. They've broken that streak, and here they are to take on LSU on Friday night in a possible matchup with Duke on Sunday, the winner of Duke and Virginia Tech. I think this Michigan State team's beating Duke if they match up. I really do. I have Duke in my bracket. I wanted to see a Michigan-Duke Final Four game. I think that would be epic, just based on the history those two programs had. I mean, two of the just blue blood programs and the history they have head-to-head against each other. But I think Michigan State, after this first weekend, and what I've seen all season long from them, Duke has not faced a team as disciplined as Michigan State or Michigan. I think Michigan State could give them fits on Sunday if that is the matchup. But, again, one at a time, folks, in the NCAA tournament. Michigan State has LSU, and Duke has Virginia Tech. Michigan will take on Texas Tech, play the winner of Gonzaga and Florida State. Lots of good matchups, folks, this weekend in college basketball, the NCAA tournament. Moving on to the Sweet 16 Elite 8 weekend. Can't get here soon enough. It's Monday. Get me to Thursday for some more college hoops. what are we going to do until Thursday? But a lot of anticipation. It makes it even more better that even better that you have to wait until Thursday because there is some really good games that are going to happen this weekend. Now it's the nitty-gritty. It's a lot of fun over the first weekend. You see some upsets, a lot of excitement. John Morant was phenomenal in both the games he played in. Too bad they didn't advance to the Sweet 16, but now, here we go. National championship will be decided in 2 weeks from today. Crazy to say already, but that will be in 2 weeks, the national championship game. Huge games this weekend. Michigan against Texas Tech. Michigan State against LSU. We will recap the entire Sweet 16 Elite 8 weekend. We'll see who's going to the Final Four next week on the show. We'll talk about all of that and more 1 week from right now. We will see you next week. Have a great night, everybody.
WTHS Holland, the voice of